chains of heavenly alloy were forged in realms beyond light, and one by one, the Watchers were dragged beneath the earth. When their feet touched the soil of Mount Hermon, it was the king who led the breach between the divine and the damned. But what kind of punishment does one give a god king?
Time. How it wreaks its little havocs. How it ticks and talks of falsehoods and unverified ideas. Have you ever wondered why the Bible says that no man will know the time or the hour of Christ's inevitable return? The statement is made so simply, so clearly and confidently, so certain. So certain despite the fact that hosts of philosophers and geniuses and time travelers and historians and portal engineers, religious scholars and pastors and hobbyists of the very concept of time itself, they would all dedicate their lives, their very existences, to the answer to that question. But what are we waiting for, really? The return of a god, the purification of a planet, the upheaval and rebuilding of some majestic kingdom? I suppose that the answer is probably a little bit different for everyone, isn't it? At the root of it, and despite differences, we do see a similar ending, though. And that is that humanity is waiting for the end of time. For thousands of years, power has worn many masks, crowns, robes, corporate logos, and digital interfaces. But behind each mask lies the same tool: control over time. And this is the hidden architecture of dominance, not through brute force, but by mastering the rhythm by which people live and sleep, pray, labor, and dream. So whether it's by sundial or smartphone, it doesn't really matter. Those who control the clock rule the soul. The Julian calendar was introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC, and it was more than just a tool of astronomy, okay? It was an empire-wide system of synchronization and assimilation. Think about it. How would Caesar, a political genius and master of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen, get everybody on the same page? Where to be, on what day, and doing what? And how would they all know to fall in line and on schedule? How would Rome last without such a power? Standardizing time allowed Rome to rule more efficiently. Taxes would be collected on time. Battles would be planned with precision. Holidays would be regimented to ensure this imperial unity. Calendar reform wasn't a neutral act. It was a restructuring of consciousness. Suddenly, the timing of everything from harvest to holy days was aligned, but not with the stars above or the planet around, but with Rome. To trade, to work, or to live with any of the benefits of Rome would require the acceptance of Rome's time. The great empire, one of the greatest the world has ever seen, would come to control a concept that would change the whole entire world for the rest of eternity. At least this mortal eternity, right? But it would bring order and commerce to a level that had never been seen before on such a scale. So fast forward to 1582, and I'm sure you've seen the conspiracy of these 11 missing days or whatever from October 1582. Pope Gregory the 13th, and for the record, some people find more days missing. Some people find there's this whole there's this whole conspiracy theory about just a random 1,500 years that is gone. It's just gone. And so like time is added and taken away by the churches and the kingdoms and the kings and the powers that be all the time. So this is just one example. But when Pope Gregory the 13th modified the calendar, he wasn't just adjusting it, right? Like some clock on the wall or something like that. He was recalibrating reality by reordering Caesar's timekeeping to adjust some pagan holidays out of reality and put some Christian holidays where the pagan ones were and all that kind of stuff. The church wasn't just fixing seasonal misalignments. No, it was launching a takeover of cosmic order. This was not about astronomy, though. It was about authority. But to truly understand this moment, you have to trace the handoff of power from Rome to the Vatican, temporal power. The Julian calendar was born under imperial conquest. Rome needed a way to synchronize its growing territories, to dictate when its subjects worked, worshipped, and waged war. Time was a tool of governance. But when the Western Roman Empire fell, its bones didn't just rot there. They were redraped in robes and given funny hats. The papacy didn't just arise from the ashes. It absorbed the Roman Empire's machinery. Bishops became bureaucrats. Emperors became saints. Latin, once the tongue of Caesar, became the tongue of Christ. The church didn't build a new system. It inherited and refined the old one, much like they speak about this Tartarian empire. And nothing was more precious in that inheritance than the calendar. The Gregorian reform wasn't a correction of the Easter alignment alone, like they might have you believe. It was a claim of succession. By adjusting Caesar's calendar, the Vatican was signaling, we are Rome now. And with that claim, of course, came a renewed assault on older timeways, indigenous lunar cycles, agricultural observances, the pagan wheel of the year. These weren't just quaint customs. They were competing realities with Rome's and the Vatican's time. To the Vatican and to any empire seeking total obedience, these organic and these local and seasonal temporalities posed a literal direct threat. Why? Because it anchored people to their land, their ancestry, and their sky, not to cathedrals or clocks, two things that were most certainly not included in the creation of man, not in the Garden of Eden, I'm afraid. Lunar calendars taught people to follow the rhythms of the moon, not some papal bull. The pagan wheel of the year honored solstices and equinoxes. It celebrated fertility and decay and rebirth, a sacred cycle that predated Christianity by millennia, and one that has been quick to be labeled pagan, and much of it was the worship of false gods, certainly, but the real pagan, if you want to call it that, the real ancient way looked a lot like the pagan way, except with the one true God. Right? But oh, how they demonize a natural life. It used to be that agricultural time honored when the earth said it was time to plant, not when some feast day dictated. And this isn't about what came first, what should last, Christianity or pagan or whatever is even further in the past. After all, what existed before Christianity and pagan ways was Adam. And if a creator God existed, he understood that religions and doctrines and time were all creations of further man, For Adam, there was no other belief to be found. Not only was there no plausible alternative concept to what he was living and seeing and believing, there literally was no other concept. God was known. They were buddies. They walked through the garden. They spoke about the universe daily. In other words, God is without time in an eternal reality. Once again, time is questioned and found a hazardous human construct. The days you count, the years you fear slipping away, the clocks ticking above your head, they're not divine. They were never part of God's design. They're a construct, a control mechanism, an artificial rhythm imposed by emperors and priests and programmers to trap your soul inside a grid of deadlines and digital calendars. Because in the true architecture of the cosmos, there is no time. Scripture hints at this, but most ignore the implications. It says, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. This is 2 Peter 3:8. Now, some people say this is poetry. Some people call it a data leak, right? But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a metaphor for time is outside of your control and doesn't pass the same for God, who is outside of time itself. Is it a cosmic clue? In the language of God, time isn't linear. It's not even sequential, really. It's weightless, elastic, it's quantum. And the 7 days of Genesis, well, those aren't days as you know them. They're epochs, intervals of unfathomable unfolding, each possibly 1,000 or 10,000 or 1,000,000 years long. Or maybe just one eternal moment. Probably not, because we do have day, night, 7 times. So there is a certain order to it. But ask yourself, what is a day, really? And I know you guys are like, holy cow, John, when you said question everything, we didn't think literally you meant everything. But no, man, what is a day? Like, how long was that? And how can we be so certain that it was a 24-hour time period? I'm aware of the scripture where Jesus says, are there not 12 hours in a day? But the answer to that is no. There's not 12 hours in a day, especially not where I live. So I guess I don't know if there's always perfectly 12 hours in a day over in the Middle East, but as far as I'm concerned, no, there's not just 12 hours in a day. So Jesus must have been talking about something else, because of course he knows that. So how long is a day? I know a lot of you stopped watching as I started questioning that, because this is a very touchy point in Christianity, but I feel like it's an important one. And if you're not a Christian and you're watching my show right now, that's just great. I'm not really a Christian either. I'm kind of something else. I'm this being that believes in this strange sort of reality/belief set that I can't really fully explain. So I have a podcast where I just try to get people to get inside my brain a little bit, and so that maybe if something makes sense, we can thrive off of it. But I'm not going to take it, at face value when it says that kind of stuff. I feel like there's a little bit more to what a day is. Humans designed the 24-hour clock. Egyptians literally carved the hours, and the Babylonians, they set the beat. The Romans introduced this 10-month year that was only 304 days long. But then came Julius Caesar, who tweaked it into the Julian calendar. And then, Pope Gregory in 1582, realigning Easter and all the holidays. And he gave birth to the Gregorian calendar, which was the Vatican's final seizure of the cosmic metronome. All of it man-made. And all of it seemingly inadvertently admitting its illegitimacy time and time again, pardon the pun. After all, the days may have literally changed length, right? We don't know. If the firmament collapsed and all that, the dinosaurs went extinct and there's giant bones in the mounds and all that kind of stuff, or, the dinosaurs never existed, or whatever is going on, the timeline was erased and there was this, if all of these are possibilities, I think it's also pretty possible to say that maybe the days have changed length since the dawn of time. But that might be uncertain and sort of just a question that could never be answered. But like the universal accepted thing is actually pretty kind of new. I don't know. I consider the 1580s kind of new. I know it's still sort of medieval periods coming out of it, but it is not that long ago when you consider that's when we really controlled time for the first time. That's it's, I don't know. It's bizarre, guys, and all I'm saying is it's strange that we actually know when it was invented and when the way that we currently keep time and all that kind of stuff evolved and from what. It's bizarre that we know that and we don't question that at all. None of it is sacred. Time itself became a weapon. It was used by empire to overwrite older organic systems, lunar calendars, agricultural moons, the wheel of the year, the Mayan calendar, all that stuff. God's concept was simply day and night, 7 times. These weren't superstitions. These were all rival operating systems. If you followed a calendar or a time way contrary to this Gregorian or this Julian calendar system, you were a pagan and you were not a friend of the church. It's just the way it was, which is kind of they want everybody to be on the same timeline. Everybody's going to have the same narrative. Get with the system or get got, I guess. That's what it sounds like to me. Because the church knew, that he who controls the clock controls the soul. And if we can't control the soul, we should just wipe them out. And that's exactly what they've been doing for so very long, basically since the origin of the Catholic Church. But what's important is that God never obeyed the clock. In Genesis, he separates light from darkness. He calls the light day and the darkness night, and that's it. There's no 24-hour cycle. There's no calendar year, only phases, movement, a pulse. So what if day one of creation wasn't 24 hours? What if it was a vast stretch of time? What if it was a cosmic breath in which matter was summoned from void and light was literally carved out of chaos? After all, since when has a painting taken only an instant to finish, right? Perhaps it took God some time. If he had the time to walk with Adam in the garden, surely he had time to craft his masterpiece. Even after the creation, the ancients didn't measure time like we do. They didn't need the second hand. Times were marked by seasons and harvests and equinoxes and the migrations of birds, the phases of the moon. To them, day and night were completely separate entities, often with different gods that were active in them. Evening and morning. Evening and morning. Let's look it up real quick because I'm drawing a blank here. And while I look this up, I will tell you the story of my eye. I am currently missing an eye, but I hope that soon I will get it back. This bandage I have over my eyes, actually my own creation because I wanted to not look like Frankenstein's monster for you guys. You're welcome. But yeah, it's a slight facial feature change. Anyway, Genesis 1. God calls the light day and the darkness night. And the verse states, and there was evening and there was morning, the first day, indicating that a full day begins with evening and ends with morning. Very interesting. And when you contemplate the idea that everything came out of darkness, it would almost imply that evening was first, right? Just like that just said, which is just kind of an interesting little tidbit. I got curious while we were talking. I needed to know for sure if it was morning and evening or day and night. So what we are seeing is two halves of a day, really. But they're distinct realities. So when we say God created the world in 6 days, maybe we're misreading the code. These might not be human days. They could be divine periods, possibly massive cycles. Imagine each day of creation as 1,000 years of divine intentional artistry. Suddenly, some of this carbon dating and all that kind of stuff, you might be able to take it out of the realm as just propaganda, archaeology tools, and instead place it in the category of information that doesn't make sense according to the timeline that we've forced ourselves to fit. These strange things that we're finding or whatever that exist all these millions of years ago or whatever this amount of time is that we can't comprehend and doesn't make any freaking sense because nobody knows what the hell 65 million even means when it comes to years, right? Like, it's just a random number. It doesn't mean anything. But the point is that we don't know how long ago whatever it is we're saying was 65 million years ago. We don't know how long ago it is, but everything that we have is telling us that it was an exorbitant amount of time ago. There's a possibility that some of that is true and that God's plan is still legit and in order, because some of this stuff might have taken a lot longer to do than we've been led to believe all of this time. Do you see the trap here? Science tells you that evolution happened over millions of years, right? But forgets to factor in how ancient humans perceive time and how God perceives time. They weren't using leap years and atomic clocks. They marked their lives in moons and rains and tides. So how can modern science make definitive claims about a timeline when the measurement stick that they use continues to change? It grows or shrinks according to whatever they need to fit in their narrative. Because if that comes undone, then you're losing control of time. All of this brings me to the bold statement that time isn't real. Time as we know it is not real. Yes, there is a passage of something. We change, our bodies grow weaker and frailer, and we grow with age and decay and all of that kind of stuff. But this clock and this calendar is not real time. It's not even time is a concept. It's a man-made thing that has been hijacked essentially. Time is, we have to continue to use the word because there's nothing else to define it as, but time it's relative. It's ritualized, and the more you believe in it, the more power it has over you. If 1,000 Earth years is a blink to God, then his patience isn't slow. It's timeless. That's why you feel rushed or afraid or like you're aging too fast, time is slipping away, because you've been tricked into thinking that time is this linear, finite, and urgent thing. But to God, to the source, your entire lifetime is a flicker, a single breath. It's not like the church was trying to get everybody to, honor all of the times that whatever happened whenever on the Christian calendar, because other people are just going to continue to ignore your calendar. It's not like changing the way that humanity perceives time is going to all of a sudden make them all believers. You still have to get them to believe, and if you weren't willing to simply accept, then you would be simply destroyed. Because those who followed alternative timelines were considered pagans. They were the enemies. That's, and I just think I know you guys are probably like, okay, dude, beating a dead horse, but it's like, I really feel like it needs to be driven home. Because that is what total narrative control is. And we see it today in some of our wars that are going on. Israel. We see all sorts of weird people and entities that are trying to manipulate timelines and histories and when somebody was where they were and when they weren't, altering history books. This is happening all the time. It was a seizure of the cosmic metronome that had governed human consciousness for millennia. So by forcing the world to conform to its version of time, the church solidified its power as the arbiter of eternity and the gatekeeper of the every freaking day, my people. Control the calendar and you control the future. Control time and you control the soul. In the 19th century, stuff changed again. The rise of the railway brought the need for a new kind of time. Standardized, synchronized, and totally stripped of locality. So like time zones would be imposed by colonial powers and industrialists. It totally flattened geography into grids. Noon was no longer when the sun hit its peak, but when the network said so. This shift, again, wasn't natural. It was engineered to serve timetables, rigid abstraction, and the cost? Well, the cost is a collective amnesia of the sky, the soil, the soul. It destroyed everything about us. We were alienated from the very thing that we were meant to abide by and care for. We became strangers on our own planet, enemies of nature for the sake of handing power over to a few. We wanted to become God of the land instead of subjects of it. And today, dang man, the calendar's in your phone. It lives there like an actual entity. It's synced by these atomic servers and all these invisible algorithms. You get pop-ups on your calendars for dates that you don't even care about, things that are happening in the area. It doesn't even matter. You're just locked in, man. It's micromanaged by everything around you. Opening and closing times, when to be at work, when you're getting paid, when the kids got to go to school, all your responsibilities. You have totally lost concept of reality, because the very reality that you attempt to return to is one of impossibility. To return to reality is to remove yourself from the concept of time, and it's just not possible. We can't do it. We don't know that way anymore. It's been stripped from us. A masterclass on how to control a species. And the more precise the clock, the less freedom you have to ignore it. Seconds and minutes and hours and all of these different ways to collect time, to force people to be here this time at that moment and do all these things right when they're supposed to, or else. But that isn't all. No, because you see Rome, the church, the mystery Babylon cults that run them both, they began to come to the understanding that faith seem to outlast and sometimes even dismantle the effects of their controlled timeline. They may be able to control human bodies, but controlling the soul was a different matter. Therefore, they would have to weaponize something else as well. They would have to weaponize God himself. And they would do this by perpetually muddying the waters, thereby limiting access to his truth. Hidden in the symmetry of evening and morning is something older than Scripture. You realize that Scripture was written by man as well, right? Something else is out there. Because these, although they were the days of creation, they were a bit like seals as well, like we see in Revelation, 7 of them. So when God rested on the 7th day, maybe he was, and we're speaking figuratively here, maybe he wasn't just kicking up his feet. He was sealing something in or out of his rest. A pause, a stillness, a moment when something slipped between cycles and stayed hidden. Because in the abyss between day and night, in the unmeasured gap between what God calls a day and what we label with clocks, there's something else there. Something that doesn't age in the same way as we do either. Because it doesn't exist within linear time. In Mesopotamian myths, the gods warred over calendars. In Babylon, kings turned time into law. But in the outermost scripts and forbidden scrolls, there's even whispers of a divine epoch before light, when the universe pulsed to a rhythm not of days, but of wills. And there's almost no way to even really talk about that kind of stuff because it's not part of the human story. So we haven't really been given that information. That's my opinion. You know, the Genesis is the origin story of humanity, but there was still something before, because at a minimum there was God, right? And we're pretty sure that, you know, the heavenly host and all of those spiritual beings also existed before us, right? Maybe that's one of the reasons that they were so jealous of us when we became God's favorite. These are entities without name, without direction. So maybe the 7 days of creation weren't simply the beginning, but a re-beginning or a restructuring. It was simply the beginning of humanity. For something else, those days may have already been and overwritten, as a matter of fact. Something older than Genesis. Let me walk you through something that you might find challenging to perceive. And it's not a theory, it's not a doctrine, but it's a possibility. And it starts in the beginning in Genesis. It says, on the 7th day, God ended his work which he had done, and he rested. This is Genesis 2:2-3. That's simple enough, right? God finishes creation, he rests, he blesses the day, it becomes holy. We're taught that the creation account kind of ends here. 6 days of forming reality and then 1 day of divine rest. But nowhere in Scripture does it say that the 7th day ever ended. So what if God never got back up? Now, skip ahead to Hebrews 4:3-5. The writer doesn't speak of the 7th day in the past tense. In fact, it implies God's rest is still ongoing. It says, for he has spoken in a certain place on the 7th day in this way, and God rested on the 7th day from all his works. And again in this place, they shall not enter my rest. Now, this isn't just recollection. This is revelation, in my opinion. These lines were written centuries after Genesis, after Exodus, after the Psalms. But the author says, they shall not enter my rest, as in the rest still exists. It's ongoing. There's a door to it, and some aren't going to be allowed in. The author of Hebrews is telling us something shocking. God's rest hasn't ended. It's still happening, which means we're still inside the 7th day. And then you come to Psalms 95, 10-11. It's David speaking generations after Moses. And he says, for 40 years I was grieved with that generation, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Again, not past tense, not symbolic. God's rest still stands, waiting to be entered, but it's not open to everyone. It has become gated, guarded. Why? Because something happened during that seventh day. Something may have gotten in. Something may have disturbed God's rest. After all, we do see him come out every now and again in the Bible, so clearly he's able to wake up at certain times, but it's almost like he's still in a period of rest where he's not going to be laboring in this day. It doesn't mean he's sleeping. It doesn't mean he's incognito. He's gone and we just don't know where he is. He's just, God is off and about. No. It means it's just not working right now, dude. He's resting. He can still talk to his favorite people. He can still perform miracles. He can still do whatever he needs to do. But he's not working. The seventh day may have never ended, guys. We were born into it, you and I. And now we're either trying to enter the Sabbath or we're being kept out or something like that. So here's the terrifying implication. What if this long silence, this long sleep of God, this cosmic Sabbath state wasn't just about, recovery from creation, but what if the seventh day was kind of always meant to be a sort of trial period, a waiting room, a garden with a serpent in it, a world designed to sort the wheat from the tares, a sort of a cosmic liminal zone, like the loading screen of reality. And some entities, they weren't part of the original work. Like we said, they entered during the rest. The Watchers, the Rephaim, the gods of old, whatever crept into Eden when God laid down his tools. That might explain why rest became conditional, why it became wrathful. They shall not enter my rest. It's a thing that we should want that we can't have because someone or something has hijacked the Sabbath. So ask yourself, where are we now? Are we nearing the end of the seventh day? Is the eighth day here? Is the eighth day the day of judgment, the day of renewal? Is it about to begin? Is that why Jesus said, I must finish his work to awaken the world at the end of God's long rest? Because if we've been in the divine pause all of this time, then what comes after the rest of God? Maybe it's something that humanity is not ready for. And it seems to be something that the Vatican is secretly counting down to with a telescope that they called Lucifer, that in my opinion they might be using to track the Watcher King. Now, we've all heard of the Watchers, at least most of us have. They were these ancient angels, if you will, that were tasked with observing mankind. They were sort of sentinels, keepers, those who watched. They weren't supposed to mess with us, but of course they didn't just watch. They burned with a hunger for us, for touch, for sensation, for something forbidden. And they ended up coming to Earth and taking human wives. From those wives, they sired monstrous children, the Nephilim, giants, and they also brought down knowledge that mankind was never supposed to possess. They brought warcraft and enchantments, and they brought blades and mirrors and sigils and makeup, and for that, they fell. Buried beneath the mountains, or shackled in the deep, bound in the abyss beneath the Euphrates, or wherever else the old texts say they are. But that's not the end of the story. That's just the crime. What history forgot was the king. They called him Semyaza. Some never say his name at all because in the older scrolls, those kept away from the light of seminaries or hidden in vaults beneath the Vatican, he's referred to not as a watcher, but as a sort of king of the Watchers. But he wasn't just their leader. He was their mirror, their mind, the first to speak the words, let us descend. He brokered the pact. He made them swear by their own names. And when their feet touched the soil of Mount Hermon, it was the king who led the breach between the divine and the damned. And make no mistake, this wasn't some seduction, not just lust. This was rebellion, a philosophical war. This Watcher King changed humanity in a way that almost makes Satan's works pale in comparison. I've been battling this concept of Satan recently, and maybe we'll get into it at a later time, but in my opinion, he's nothing compared to this Watcher King. And considering that Satan was also sort of this concoction of the Catholic Church, you have to wonder if a name is being hidden from us and a different name, a less dangerous name, is replacing that one. These Watchers and the Watcher King, Semyaza, they gave mankind knowledge. In their minds, maybe not to corrupt us, but to free us. But what kind of punishment does one give to a God King if you were God? After all, he was literally the mathematician of humanity's ruin. Archangels, Michael and Raphael and Uriel, they descended not as messengers, but as warriors, tasked with collecting these fallen ones. And they were chained. These chains were forged in these realms beyond light to hold these watchers in place, in prison, to await their judgment. But not their king. He was bound a little bit differently. Buried under layers of time and language and misremembered myth, coded into architecture, etched into bloodlines, hidden beneath basilicas and beneath the seals of kings. He was imprisoned, yeah, but only in the way that a virus is contained, only until conditions may be able to awaken him and trigger some great war. There are stories that still reach us through dream and through madness and through architecture. In Mesopotamia, he was Enmedaranki, the priest king of Sippar, taken into the sky and returned glowing with secrets. In Babylon, he was Apkalu, a fish-bodied sage creature who gifted mankind with science before the flood wiped everybody out. And in modern occultism, he appears in fragments and rituals that call him the King of the East or the Sovereign of the Veil, in Freemasonic oaths whispered beneath pillars, modeled after Solomon's temple, an edifice where watchers once circled the ark of something they could never contain. Names are hidden there as well, because after all, they're power. And that is what he has always craved, this Watcher King. Not worship, not love, control. He's no Lucifer. He's colder, more precise. He does not tempt. He infiltrates and systematically destroys. He introduces cannibalism inadvertently or directly. We don't really know the scales of the evil, but it's worse than anything you can possibly imagine. So when you bow to clock towers and calendars and you trust machines that measure time but not consequence, when your leaders just echo all these ideas that they never actually authored, and your churches hide beneath domes instead of stars, you're living in a kingdom built by the Watcher King, by Semyaza. A system that he rewrote the way that he wanted to, the way that he thought was best for mankind. The punishment of the Watchers for these crimes was meant to be eternal, but time itself has become a prison of his design. The spiritual war is so much deeper than we can even imagine. It's not a simple Satan versus God war. There is a labyrinth of seconds and centuries meant to keep you asleep. And like the Western Greco-Roman utopian empire known as the USA, the war itself is intentionally hidden to keep you complacent and unaware. But now, his children are waking up. The Nephilim appear to have never really truly died. Their bones lie under museums and churches and roads and schools and in mounds, and their names are carved into oil fields. And the Watcher King, he just waits. He's in limbo, but he just waits. He doesn't blink, he doesn't rest, doesn't do anything. He just watches. Some people will call this fantasy, obviously, especially people who don't subscribe to the Book of Enoch and all that kind of stuff. After all, the design is that you believe he's nothing but a myth, because if you knew what he truly was, what he still is, you'd start to question the entire scaffold of authority. You'd start seeing the patterns. Why did the Vatican astronomers name a telescope Lucifer? Why are the Nephilim suddenly back in the lexicon of Pentagon patents? Why does every king bow to something older, unseen? Who are these pop stars and these actors and these ditty partyists worshiping? It doesn't seem like it's just Satan, guys. It seems like it's something older, something worse. This king of forbidden light. Satan worship is a gimmick. It's pathetic, and it paints the deceiver as a sort of mastermind, when in actuality, he himself is kind of nothing more than a clever disguise. For being the so-called primary adversary of God, he's mentioned precious little. Just like the planets. Isn't that kind of weird? Planets aren't really talked about. Almost like they might be watchers chained in the abyss. But the abyss is up there, and we can see it. We can see them held prisoner. But that's contrary to science, so only venture down that path if you got big old balls of brass and you're ready to really knock them together. So anyway, where was I? I'm so sorry. The Bible doesn't talk about Satan in the way that you would expect it to talk about Satan. Satan kind of walks behind veils. He's got these masks. He takes on these roles and these functions. And he's the opposer in Job. He's the serpent, the whisperer in Eden, the tempter in the desert, the dragon in Revelation, maybe. And he always watches from the threshold, just out of frame. In the Old Testament, Satan doesn't refer to a single cosmic enemy of God, it seems. Instead, it seems to designate a role, a function, a prosecutor, an opposer, an adversary. Not evil incarnate, just resistance. This figure is not yet the devil. He's something just a little more unsettling. He's part of the divine courtroom, if you will. In the book of Job, we can see it's one of the oldest books in the Bible, dating to the 6th or 5th century. We can see the clearest and most formal introduction to Satan. It says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them." And that's in Job 1:6. Here, the translation is the accuser. It's not some rogue demon. He's among the Bene Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, a class of divine beings that you could call angels if you wanted to. But he's part of the divine council of God, similar to like a courtroom attorney. And his job is to test the faith of humans. He challenges God. Stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. God then permits Satan to afflict Job horribly, but does place some limits. And Satan, He doesn't act independently. He acts on divine permission then. Satan here does not seem to be evil. He seems to be a tester. He is not in opposition to God's will. He's an official in the divine bureaucracy, a cosmic prosecutor allowed to test, to question, and to accuse, not out of malice, but as part of God's sort of legal system. And there's other verses that go on and on about this. We see that Satan is performing a role. He's doing a job, but at the same time, he seems to be becoming something different over time, to the point where it's difficult to tell if he is Satan that falls, or if a different, deeper story has been woven in with this Satan idea, this new enemy, this Satan to hide the Watcher King behind. Because there's a part of me that believes that when they start talking about this war in the end, it might not be merely Satan that is heading that charge, that is the antagonist here. It might be something much, much scarier and worse. Now, I'm aware that this concept probably sounds absolutely insane to pretty much any indoctrinated Christians and maybe even unbelievers. And if you're watching this far into the video, you're definitely probably like, you're a crazy person too, by the way. But how could Satan possibly not be the arch nemesis of God? You're probably saying to yourself. And to me, quite simply, it's just, it isn't that simple. And Satan, I don't know, he's just a mere angel. This idea of Semyaza knowing the name of God, being like one of the only, if not the only watcher to know the name of God, a name so powerful that we would combust into flames and burst into a bajillion pieces if we heard it. Somehow Semyaza is able to know it. The name of God. Not Satan, Samyaza. Most people believe that they know who Satan is. They picture him as a fallen angel, cast out of heaven for rebelling against God. He's this horned, red, lurking in the shadows with fire behind his eye kind of guy. But the truth is, that version of Satan, the one taught in Sunday school, painted on medieval walls and whispered about in horror movies, that's a theological illusion, guys. That's not real. It's a carefully stitched patchwork of misunderstood scriptures and later traditions and post-biblical mythology, because in the Bible itself, Satan's origin as a fallen angel doesn't appear to be clearly stated. Take Isaiah 14:12, the famous Lucifer verse, right? How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. That's the King James Version. But the original Hebrew doesn't say Lucifer. It says Hallel ben Shachar, meaning shining one, son of the dawn. That might not be about the devil. That might be a taunt against the king of Babylon, mocking his arrogance and downfall. Or that might be a different name for one of these watchers, specifically the Watcher King Semyaza. A lot of these entities have many different names. They change forms and shapes and names constantly. Lucifer only entered the picture through a Latin mistranslation in the Vulgate and was later adopted by Christian writers who retrofitted it into this satanic identity. What was once political satire became cosmic biography, but that shift matters. So, Satan is a bad guy, but is he the biggest bad guy on the block? Or do we need to bring another character into this? This character is one that we've been talking about, Semyaza. He who has seen the name. The title is telling. The name of God, right? In early Jewish cosmology, the explicit name of God is creation's master key, and Semyaza was one of the very few celestial beings allowed to utter it. Possessing that secret made him a natural leader among the Watchers, the 200 angels who were appointed to observe human history without infiltrating it. He is the Watcher King, and he is the bigger dog on the block. Storytellers describe a cosmic debate that sort of predates the flood. Samyaza and his little butt buddy Azazel, they argued that humanity would inevitably collapse under its own depravity. And God replied, in effect, you think you could do it better? Go ahead. So the Watchers descended, not to overthrow, but to prove a thesis. And their mandate was essentially clinical detachment. Annotate the human experiment, don't intervene. But omniscience without agency breeds its own pathology, and the more Semyaza understood the structures of life, the more he completely disregarded the prohibition against touching it. That's the idea, anyway. So the Book of Watchers, 1 Enoch 6-7, records the moment the mandate sort of snapped. Earth's women, it says, became fair, and the Watchers burned for them. And Semyaza balked, I fear that you will not indeed agree, and I alone shall bear the sin. And he said this to his fellow fallen angels. And that line is crucial because he foresees the judgment, but the dread of solitary blame outweighs the dread of the crime. So to dilute responsibility, he drafts a pact. Every Watcher has to swear an oath that if one falls, we all fall. Collective guilt became the anesthesia of conscience, if you will. And then once embodied, the Watchers crossed two taboos: carnal union and intellectual disclosure. So, they take wives, and their children, the Nephilim, grow into these carnivorous giants who devoured mankind when ordinary food ran out. Simultaneously, the angels disgorged the heavenly curriculum, metallurgy and weapon craft and cosmetics and root cutting, astrology, enchantments. Civilization lurches forward technically and crashes morally. We were given too much too quick. Power outpaces wisdom. Appetite trumps stewardship. And the planet spirals into violence so pervasive that a global flood becomes, in Enoch's worldview, the only reset button left. It's gotta happen. God's response, of course, is surgical, as it tends to be. Gabriel incites war among the hybrids. Raphael buries Azazel in jagged stones at Dudale. Uriel warns Noah, and Michael binds Semyaza. And the charge is bind Semyaza and his companions for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth until the day of their judgment, then lead them to the abyss of fire. Interesting. Now again, this is the Book of Enoch, a controversial book, and there's nothing saying that this is supreme truth, and I'm definitely not saying that this is the supreme truth. Some people don't acknowledge this whatsoever. But the Bible has also been manipulated to all hell. We've got totally different Bibles than a lot of other Bibles that are out there here in the West. And there's also just been so many books and texts that have been omitted over time or disregarded or thrown away to the point that this King James Version that was formed in England, by the way, given to us by the church, we have this super shiny little Bible, and this is supposed to be the one that we accept. Even though there's all these other texts that churches, Christian churches like the Ethiopians, all over the world, who have their own Bibles that have other books in them. There is a story that Semyaza became overcome by remorse for all of this chaos that he caused on the planet. So he suspends himself head down between heaven and earth, one eye open to watch his ruin and the other closed in shame. And later storytellers cast this penitent silhouette onto the night sky as the constellation of Orion, or possibly a planet. A cosmic scarecrow, essentially warning angels and men of what could happen. Essentially, a head on a spike. A sign for us that our God is an awesome God. Something like that. And though chained, you might be asking, how is there still evil here then? Semyaza's influence survives in the knowledge that has already been seeded. Post-flood demonology explains that the disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim become the first generation of Shedim, who were hungry because they were born of hunger. They're famished. They can't be satisfied. But meanwhile, Semyaza's name echoes throughout all of these magical grimoires throughout time. He's the topic of so many different occult little groups, and he's just this thing that just exists within that community so deeply that in a way he's just still alive. Not to mention that every single aspect of our weird, unable to be explained world and life are basically because of what he did to us, what he gave to us, and what him and his 200 did to us. So we can't escape his influence. His influence is here. It's like when you defeat a sickness, but the sickness still made you a cripple or something like that. It's like you can't just undo the damage that is semi-permanent, permanent until, the redemption. I think that the concept of a ultimate good and an ultimate bad, and there's two sides and they butt heads. It's God and it's Satan. Life's not even like that. There's always multiple bad guys. There's always this bad guy, and then there's a worse bad guy, and there's a richer bad guy, and this guy's got an army, and there's always more than one bad guy. So why are we sitting here and we're like, oh, it's Satan versus God? What has Satan actually done? Test Eve? Look what Semyaza has done. Look what the Watchers did, man. That's the evil. And so what is the point of this episode, right? What is the point I'm trying to make here? The point I'm trying to make is that this whole time that we've been walking the walk and talking the talk as believers or Christians or whatever you want to call yourself, we may have had it wrong. Because first of all, we're on a Catholic calendar. And second of all, we are afraid of a Catholic invented anti-God, Satan. We are afraid of a creature that was concocted based on about 18 verses in the Bible, most of which he is not in the role of an arch nemesis, and some of which may proclaim him as an arch nemesis, seem to be controversial at best. But some of these other books that have been omitted or that are glossed over in the Bible, passages that are sort of breezed over, we see signs that there's more than one evil to be concerned about. But in the end, no matter what, to have faith. That's the answer. Just to have the faith. Sorry if that was anticlimactic, right? But the enemy is more evil than we will ever expect. If we get to see the end times, it will be horrors beyond comprehension. Don't drink the water. Question everything. Question everyone. And don't trust time. See y'all later.